I was at college, UK college, when the Canon 5D Mark III was released. I remember that camera being the gold standard for YouTube videos at the time, and it cost around $3,500. And since then, lower end cameras have come a very long way, to the point where there are entry-level cameras out there right now that can do more than the 5D ever could, and they're a fraction of the price. You've got 4K video, slow motion, and better low light, and you even have iPhones that can shoot cinematic mode video. Essentially, the bar for quality content on YouTube is coming down, and it's making it even easier to turn these entry-level cameras into cinematic beasts. And we have a few tricks that make getting that cinematic look much easier. Before we dive in, I want to quickly remind everyone that if you want to see more videos on how to make better videos, then go ahead and check out my own personal YouTube channel. I have a ton of videos on cameras, lighting, and sound, so if any of that interests you, then go ahead, check me out, link down below. But today we're going to dive in and share some very simple tricks to get more cinematic looking footage out of your cheap DSLR or mirrorless camera. And the first one I want to talk about is depth of field and how you can get that nice, silky, smooth, blurry background for your YouTube videos. For those that don't know what depth of field means, it's simply the range of what's in focus to the camera. And there are two main focus ranges. There's a shallow depth of field and then a deep depth of field. And to kind of make those phrases a bit easier to understand, think of an ocean and think of a shoreline. A shallow depth of field is a very small, short range of focus that creates that nice blurry background that we're all familiar with. And a deep depth of field is the opposite, where you don't have that blurry background and you can see more of the background in focus. It's more sharp, it's more tactile. A lot of cheap cameras will come with stock lenses, and now these lenses aren't very good. They're not going to give you the best shallow depth of field compared to other more expensive lenses on the market. And a lot of cheap cameras will come with crop sensors, which also reduces the amount of blur you can get with those stock lenses. And we actually have a full video covering the differences between a pro camera and a cheap camera, so I'll leave a link to that down below or up here if you guys want to go ahead and check that out. But there are a few tricks you can do to get more of a shallow depth of field with those cheaper cameras. Let me show you how. The first thing you can do is move your camera back and zoom in to your subject. This is called background compression, and it happens when you get the glass elements of a lens and compress them closer together. You're zooming in onto your subject and thus compressing the distance between them and the background. And the more you zoom in, the more compression you will have. And what that does is it creates a very nice, silky smooth, blurry background effect. You can even take this one step further and have a much larger zoom lens to compress that background even more and increase the amount of blur that you have. Now, it's very important to mention that a lot of cheaper lenses will have something that's called a variable aperture. The aperture is the iris for the lens. That determines how blurry a background can be, but it also determines how much light can be let in to hit the camera's sensor. You can identify this by looking at the F number on a lens. A lower number means it's a faster lens, which means it lets in more light and has a much more shallow depth of field. A higher f-stop number means it's not as fast, doesn't let in as much light, and doesn't have as much of a shallow depth of field. By changing this number, you can darken your image, and a lot of cheaper lenses will change their aperture across its focal length, which means when you zoom in onto your subject, your image might become darker. So that's just something to bear in mind if you are using a cheaper lens and you are shooting in less than desirable lighting conditions. And speaking of lighting, I think it's important to clarify that the best way to get cinematic footage is through better lighting. The word cinematic is definitely thrown around on YouTube a lot lately with LUT packs and slow motion footage, but cinematography is mainly about lighting and composition. If you want to get more cinematic footage, really start looking at cinematography and framing and use depth of field for that nice sweet cherry on top. And if you guys are interested, I actually have a video going over single lighting techniques if you want to use those to improve the look of your videos. I'll leave a link to that video down below in the description. The next one actually has a couple of really cool tricks for getting smoother camera movements without much gear. Because let's face it, camera gear can be very expensive and not everyone can afford a gimbal or a slider to get smoother shots. So let's talk about a couple of different tricks you can do, starting off with a good old trusty camera strap. Camera straps are pretty annoying at the best of times, and I personally always take mine off, but they can be really useful in a pinch. You can use them to create smoother handheld camera shots by very simply pulling the camera strap against you while holding the camera. What that does is it introduces another point of contact between you and the camera, and adding more points of contact will reduce the shakiness for those handheld shots. You can also use your chest as a point of contact to keep the camera steady, or you can can use your eye if you use the viewfinder on your camera to frame your shot. Another great way to get really stable footage is by using a tripod. And yes, I know some of you are thinking, well duh, but let me explain. I mean using a tripod in a much more creative way. For example, if you collapse all of the legs on a tripod, you essentially make a DIY monopod. For one, this makes your handheld footage a lot more steady to begin with, but you can also create some really nice dolly and orbiting style movements with this technique. Those kinds of shots work really well in montages or fast-paced sequences where you want to convey a lot of momentum really easily. And you may notice on some tripods they have little hooks on the center column. Those are for adding weight to the tripod, so things like a sandbag or a counterweight or anything else you have to hand. By adding weight to the tripod or even to the camera itself, you really reduce those micro jitters you experience with handheld footage and makes a shot a lot more stable. And as a little bonus tip for this one, if you want to create some really nice, smooth and gimbal looking movements, then all you need to do is turn your tripod upside down. The weight of the camera and the weight of the tripod will naturally go to the bottom and create a counterweight to create that nice, smooth, gimbal-like movement. Record your shot, and then when you're editing that video, all you need to do is rotate that clip around so it's the right way up, and you have something pretty effective. Now, I don't think it really needs to be said, but just be very careful with that last one. Make sure your camera and your tripod are secured correctly, because the last thing you want to do is drop your camera. That would be bad, so just be careful. And that is my official disclaimer, by the way. I'm not taking responsibility if you guys break your cameras, so, you know, just be warned. And if you guys want to see more videos where I talk about filming techniques and getting better shots, I've left a link to a video that I made on my own personal channel down below on how to get better and smoother B-roll shots. So if you want to learn more, go ahead and check that out. Moving on, and if you guys are enjoying this video and are finding it helpful, and if you think other people might find it helpful too, then go ahead and give the video a like. I would greatly appreciate that. But our next tip actually focuses on colouring and tweaking that footage to make it look more cinematic. Most cheaper, lower-end cameras now have the ability to shoot in a log format. For example, the Sony ZV-E10 shoots in both S-Log2 and S-Log3, but more on that in a little bit. And for those that don't know what log is a picture profile that allows cameras to capture the most information possible in the shadows and the highlights. It allows the camera the ability to capture the most detail and dynamic range, so you have more flexibility in the editing stages. And log works a little bit differently than normal formats. For example, it's important to expose log footage correctly, otherwise you're going to have a nasty time fixing footage in the edit later on. It's a much more advanced camera technique, and the footage coming out of camera can look pretty bland and pretty boring, but if we apply a LUT to this footage, you can really see how it changes the footage and improves the overall look and feel of it. And this is a great way to make your footage look more appealing and to create a cinematic look for your videos. Now, it needs to be said that you should still know how to light and frame an image to get the best possible look. Throwing a LUT onto really poorly shot and lit footage is not some kind of magic wand that's going to fix everything. LUTs are a great way to get you started. They are a good foundation to help build upon, to help create the look you're after for your videos. And if you're looking to get started in using LUTs, I can highly recommend looking at ones from large creators like Peter McKinnon and Daniel Schiffer. And if you are like us and you use Sony cameras, I can highly recommend the Phantom LUTs. They are the ones that we personally use on the Alpha Gaming videos. They don't fix your videos, but they make it really easy to start the creative process to find a look and a feel that you want for your videos. Now, it's important to remember that not all log profiles are made equally, and it's important to remember this before you start diving in. Higher end cinema and mirrorless cameras often come with the ability to shoot in a 10-bit color profile, which makes it a lot easier when you're in the editing stages to do color correction and grading, because you can manipulate the image a lot easier. And some cameras like the Sony ZV-E10 I mentioned before will only shoot in 8-bit color, which makes it a lot more difficult to manipulate the image the way you want it to. So you need to be a little bit careful when coming up with LUTs and finding ones you want to use in your footage. And there are 8-bit LUTs on the market that you can go and check out and research, so go ahead, find the ones for your brand of camera, download them and give them a try and see which ones you like. And you know what, why don't I give you guys some extra bonus tips, some more cinematic goodies if you will. Some of them are ones we actually do on this channel. One of the main ones that we do an awful lot on this channel to get more cinematic footage is we shoot in 60 frames per second for a couple of different reasons. For one, it allows us to do some really cool speed ramps, which we use an awful lot on product videos to create some really nice, dynamic and interesting movements within our footage. But the main reason we like to shoot in 60 frames per second is because it helps reduce the camera shake when working with handheld footage. Shooting at a higher frame rate and then slowing that down in the editing process lets us take out a lot of those sharp movements and bumps that you get when you are shooting handheld. All you need to do is bring your 60 FPS footage into your editor, bring it into a 30 FPS timeline, and then slow it down by 50%. And then combine that with all the other things we mentioned in this video, and you'll have a pretty good looking shot. And another thing that we do an awful lot in our YouTube videos that's actually pretty subtle, but you may notice that we're not in a 16:9 video format. We actually edit our videos in a 2:1 aspect ratio. And you may be wondering, what does that even mean? Well, very simply, what we do is we reduce the height of our project's resolution to create that widescreen effect. You may notice this a lot in movies because they shoot a lot of movies with anamorphic lenses which naturally squish the frame, so when they stretch it back out again, it creates a much wider field of view. And you can kind of emulate this if you find some widescreen bar templates on Google and use them in your project, but by adjusting the height of the project, you can create a much more natural wider screen aspect ratio without having to worry about the black bars on the top and bottom. And it definitely looks a lot cleaner when you upload that video to YouTube because the player will naturally conform to the height of the video. And if you want to kind of create this for yourself, I've actually included a calculator down below in the description. If you want to figure out what kind of aspect ratio you want to use for your videos, go ahead, use that and see which one you prefer. So, with that said and done, what did you guys think? Did I miss anything out on the list that you felt like I should have included? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, if you want to see more videos like this, then go ahead and check out my own personal YouTube channel, link down below. And, as always, happy streaming.